Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to bring you the next installment in my ongoing series of videos all about the 90s PBS Kids TV show Wishbone. In case you've never seen any of the Wishbone episodes, or in case you've never even heard of them before, what they were half-hour episodes of television that had two different storylines going on pretty much at the same time. One storyline adapted a famous work of literature, and the other storyline focused on a modern, aka 1990s family, and their storyline would be some way inspired by that episode's work of literature. In this series of videos here on my channel, what I try to do is break down a single episode of Wishbone. I compare it against the classic that they've chosen to take on in that episode. I note what the writers of that episode chose to include from the classic work versus what they might have chosen to exclude. Based on that, I try to determine whether or not it was an effective episode of Wishbone. Did it faithfully capture what that work of literature is all about? Would it potentially make the very young audience interested in the work of literature, which I think is the whole point of the show? And I try to determine what, if any, moral messages the writers decided to extract from that work of literature, considering the audience was very young. In today's video, we will be looking at the early season 1 episode that takes on one of the 4 Sherlock Holmes novels by Arthur Conan Doyle, The Hound of the Baskervilles, in an episode entitled The Slobbery Hound. Let's take a look. What's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone? What's this you're dreaming of?
This episode begins, very appropriately, on a stormy evening. Wishbone is attempting to sniff out the culprit of a crime. Someone has wreaked havoc on the neighborhood they've generally made just a big old mess, and he wants to find out who did it. He eventually finds a clue, some footprints of a large dog, which of course leads him into introducing the book. In the second storyline, the book storyline, Watson and Holmes are meeting with Mortimer and Henry Baskerville when Holmes, played by Wishbone of course, starts outlining the case and its background. According to legend, the Baskerville family is cursed because of the actions of the evil Hugo Baskerville, and now any Baskerville who walks alone at night on the moor is destined to be killed by a mysterious, supernatural hound. The latest victim was Henry's uncle, who was just found dead on the moor with footprints nearby. Henry Baskerville is skeptical that the hound was indeed responsible, remembering that his uncle had a bad heart, but Mortimer believes it was the dog, 100%. Holmes decides to send his friend and confidant, Watson, to Baskerville Hall to investigate, supposedly in his place, since he tells everyone he has to stay in London, but Holmes actually travels there in secret and goes undercover looking for clues in an adorable montage. He gets a good look at a portrait of old Hugo Baskerville before he starts watching Watson investigate. Watson talks to the neighbor, Mr. Stapleton, and his sister when they all suddenly hear a howl coming from the forest. Back to the modern storyline, with Wishbone hot on the trail of the mysterious, destructive dog. He spies a bloodhound he thinks is responsible, but everyone in the town seems to think that Wishbone himself is doing all the damage. Poor Wishbone is tied up in the yard as a result, but he breaks free to keep trailing the mystery dog. Eventually, he's collected by animal control and returned home in a muzzle, at which point the family is fined $150, and I looked it up. That's $250 in today's money. Joe and his friends go clean up some of the damage that Wishbone has supposedly caused when they realize the paw print and jaw marks don't match little Wishbone at all. They start investigating to see what dog could have been responsible using the clues that they gathered. Back in the book adaptation, Wishbone as Sherlock Holmes deduces who was responsible for the crime. It turns out that one of the residents of this town was actually secretly a Baskerville descendant and wanted the fortune that Henry Baskerville just inherited entirely for himself. He was using the legend of the Hound as a means to achieve his ends. Watson and Holmes actually intervene on the final portion of this plot to eliminate Henry Baskerville from the equation, and thus they save Henry Baskerville's life. Meanwhile, the kids finally catch up with that slobbery, destructive, yet adorable bloodhound. Animal control comes to get him and rightfully rips up that pricey citation. So let's discuss this episode. I thought this one was pretty neat and tidy overall, if I do say so myself. Of course, the story of the Hound of the Baskervilles is condensed quite a bit to fit within the episode. Like in the episode, we meet Henry Baskerville right away, whereas there is a little bit of a delay in the book. We don't meet him straight away. Then there's the marriage between the Stapletons, the Barrymores as characters, Laura as a character, and the whole convict storyline. All of those things are left out, but I'm guessing that was mainly for the sake of time. I do, however, think that the episode still worked perfectly well in spite of those omissions. There wasn't really any kind of moral message to this episode, and that made sense to me because that's not really the point of Sherlock Holmes stories. They're meant to be fun mysteries, but I did notice some crossover themes. One of them was resemblance, and the other one was things not being as they immediately appear. Like, on the surface, it could seem like Wishbone was the one destroying this entire town, but when you look closer at the evidence, it's revealed that he couldn't have possibly done it. And then in the book adaptation, the portrait of evil Hugo Baskerville is right out there in the open. If you know what to look for, it's right under everyone's noses. That is what led Sherlock Holmes to his conclusion. This episode did a really good job of toning down the violent, scary parts of the book. When you're watching the episode, you realize that there have been deaths, and it definitely has that appropriate, sinister feel to it, but it's toned down to the level where it's appropriate for younger children, where it's not going to give them nightmares, but it also doesn't feel that they watered down the story in any kind of a way. And unlike in some other episodes of Wishbone that I've watched and covered for this series, I felt like they gave enough of the plot of The Hound of the Baskervilles to give kids a sampling of the book, and to me at least that has always seemed like the purpose of this show, to give a taster of what some of these works of literature have to offer so that these kids can go and read these books at a certain point in the future when it's age appropriate for them to do so. I also think this episode was successful because it was so entertaining to watch. Wishbone as Sherlock Holmes, I mean, he's adorable, so that's a gimme right there, but also seeing the three main kids, who are tremendous actors, by the way, seeing them conduct this investigation was so entertaining, partially because it was so legitimate. They were measuring things in the whole nine. You have to know that any kid who watches this episode, the minute this episode is done, they're going to want to race outside with a ruler and a magnifying glass and start their own investigation. I just loved this episode. I think it's one of the most successful ones that I've seen thus far, that I've covered in this series thus far. And I hope all the ones I have remaining are just like this one, because to me, this is quintessential Wishbone. It stayed true to the material. If you hadn't already read the book, I think it would have gotten you interested in reading the book. It didn't try to do too much, and it was just great fun to watch. 10 out of 10. So those were my thoughts on this episode of Wishbone. If you have any comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video or about anything in general, please feel free to leave those in the comment section below. And if you would like to keep up with what I'm reading, you can find me on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.
Funding for Wishbone provided by annual financial support from PBS viewers like you.